Let's turn to the Fed, where the big news is obviously that Kevin Warsh has been nominated by President Trump as the new chairman of the Fed. Now, he is someone who has good hair and good looks and is, as President Trump called him, from central casting. He was governor of the Federal Reserve throughout the financial crisis. He's an extremely well-respected Wall Street man. But Henry, beyond that, give us a kind of quick summary of Warshanomics. What is it about?
Well, what Kevin Warsh wants to do is get interest rates down. He's more or less said to Trump to get the job that he will do this. And the justifications he's come up with for that are that, one, the AI boom is going to lead to a productivity surge, and that will allow the Fed to keep interest rates down because productivity is disinflationary. It's good to have lots of stuff. And the second part of that is that he thinks you can shrink the Fed's balance sheet, which is another part of monetary policy, and that's contractionary, and to offset that, you can cut interest rates, a bit like pressing the brake and the accelerator on the car at the same time. So those are the two planks of Warshanomics that he thinks will allow him to give the president what he wants, which is lower interest rates.
Now, Zanny, I know this because we've talked about Warsh quite a lot over a number of years. You've known him now for, 15 years, something like that?
Yeah, I don't know him well, but I met him when I had Henry's job, some 15 years ago at central banker gatherings where he was sort of a swashbuckling figure. But he is a serious, he's a lawyer by training, I think, but he was a serious figure, a Wall Street figure. He knows the markets extremely well. He played a very important role in the financial crisis of 08, 09. He was the kind of Ben Bernanke, the then chair, sort of conduit to the markets. But I have always thought of him as a conservative economist, someone who's extremely hawkish. In fact, he was hawkish when it was unfashionable to be hawkish, when there probably wasn't much of a reason to be hawkish. Archie, you've actually been doing some interesting work this week. You've built an LLM, right, which characterizes the hawkishness and dovishness of Warsh speak. Do you want to talk us through what you found?
The question everyone's been playing with is just how political is Kevin Warsh? How much is he a kind of classic technocrat as he at times, is, and how much is he a really kind of political actor? And this chart, I think, gets across something pretty striking, which is, Kevin Warsh is a hawk, so higher values on this chart mean more hawkishness, so more anxiety about inflation, more desire to pull up interest rates, and for pretty much all of his career, he's really been a hawkish figure. And there are a few exceptions. He was not a hawk in the depths of the financial crisis, he was not a hawk in the depths of COVID, but really that's the pattern. And then you see this remarkable pivot. So you see Donald Trump coming in, that line right at the end, and then this crash as Kevin Warsh suddenly reinvents himself as this rate-cutting, easy monetary policy, dovish figure who will deliver the things that Donald Trump says he wants, much lower interest rates. And we'll now see if he does.
We've actually got a question, Archie, for you from one of our viewers, Graham Hallwood, who asks, is policy simply decided by one governor equals one vote majority wins? What influence does the Fed chair have in theory and also in practice?
Yeah, it's a really important question. So there's the norms and then there's the rules. So the rules are that it's one member, one vote on the FOMC. It's the rate setting committee, and that's made up of Fed governors and also some of the regional bank presidents of the regional Fed branches in the US. And so usually that's one person, one vote. It's generally a very consensus-driven body for the most part. But in theory, and in kind of the rules themselves, that means that the Fed chair could be very easily outvoted. And the norm is that doesn't happen. The norm is that usually everyone goes along with what the Fed chair wants, but also the norm is the Fed chair's pretty technocratic, not very political, not going on Fox News and catering to the whims of the president, as Kevin Warsh has been doing. So that's really going to be tested, I think, as he tries to deliver those interest rate cuts.
Right. I mean, I find myself wondering whether it's really sustainable for a Fed chair to be outvoted by the majority. I mean, Fed chairs are... It's, as you say, it's a norm because Fed chairs don't want to be seen to be at odds with the rest of the committee.
I think it's not, actually. And I think, Archie, one area where I would slightly take issue with you, I think successful Fed chairs are actually incredibly politically astute. They have to be. Alan Greenspan was a remarkable politician. I think they are less overtly political in the sense that you go on Fox News and say what the president says, but the politics of managing to bring the FMC with you is really important.
It's the small p politics versus the kind of partisan politics. And famously, Kevin Warsh is meant to be a figure who's very, very good at that. But he's really going to be tested. But
it potentially puts Warsh in a very difficult position. I mean, he's got Trump on one side, who implicitly he's made promises to in order to get the job. He's got running the committee on the other side, and somehow he has to try and bridge these two things.
So a lot of this, I think, depends on whether his sort of intellectual gambit can work. And Henry, in simple terms so that I understand them, can you explain what underpins this idea that if you have QT, so you have a balance sheet tightening at the long end, that enables you to loosen short-term rates? And do you think he can pull it off?
Well, they're both tools of monetary policy, so it sort of stands to reason that if you loosen with one hand, you can tighten with the other. I think the real problem with this is that I just don't think, and I don't think most central bankers think, that QE is that powerful a tool. And earlier in his career, in the 2010s, Kevin Warsh was really concerned that QE after the global financial crisis would unleash inflation. That turned out not to be the case. And I think now he's making a similar error if he thinks that really shrinking the Fed's balance sheet, which, by the way, is quite technically difficult to do, but probably is doable, if shrinking the Fed's balance sheet will give him loads of space to cut rates. I just don't think it's that powerful at all. So that's the problem I'd have. It's sort of about the quantum of the effect rather than whether it's there.
I wonder whether, I mean, that makes good sense to me, but I wonder whether he just doesn't use it as a fig leaf to cut rates. So he says, what I'm doing QT here, therefore I need to cut rates, and then he uses it as a kind of presentational tool in order to do what Trump wants.
And that's where the rest of the committee comes in. Are they convinced by this argument or not?
So I think my prediction would be that he talks a lot about radical change at the Fed, about dramatic changing of its remit, about dramatic changing and tightening of cutting of the balance sheets, but actually doesn't do as much as the short end as people expect. And I think that's what the market are expecting, right? That's what people are assuming, that there isn't going to be as much dovishness as people expect. But where are you, Henry, on that?
I think that we should take him on his word and that we will get more short-term interest rate cuts than we would do with Jerome Powell in office, for sure. It's true the markets didn't move very much, but I think we should take him at his word on that.
So do you think independence is at risk now?
Well, that's not quite the same thing. I think we might get more inflation on account of that. I don't think the American economy looks like it needs a lot of short-term interest rate cuts, as we were saying. I think Warsh, especially as Trump gets weaker during his presidency, it's not going to be in the pocket of the president. But just in terms of what you get right now, I think you get more rate cuts than you do under Powell.
Let's ask Archie where he comes out, having done this deep dive into every word that Kevin Warsh has ever said.
I'm not going to try to kind of predict the soul of the man, much as that would be quite entertaining to do. But no, I think the exact question is, can he bring the board along? And his career suggests he's very, very astute at that. But I think even if he does that, you get easier policy than Jerome Powell. I think that's definitely true. But not by that much. I'd guess he'd bring 1 or 2 extra rate cuts than you'd get if you stuck with Jerome Powell. But Trump says he wants interest rates down by a full percentage point, 2 or 3 percentage points. That's really, really hard to see.
He's been nominated, but he has to get through the Senate. And Senator Tom Tillis, who has basically said he is not going to allow any nominations through until the criminal investigation into Jerome Powell is lifted. Could you just tell us, Archie, where you think that's going to end up?
I really can't see the Senate ultimately being an issue. So absolutely, Tom Tillis is saying this. Usually a Department of Justice investigation, like the one that's been launched into the Fed, is very arm's length, very independent from the president. Once it's rolling, kind of is rolling. But that's not what's going on in this investigation. It's very clear this is a politically motivated investigation that ultimately stems from the desires of the administration. So just as they can turn it on, and they can turn it off. And it's going to be difficult, require a bit of deftness. But Trump's already distanced himself from this. I mean, this was a bit of a disaster when it was rolled out, and there was a huge backlash, not just from Tillis, but from a lot of Republican senators who are usually quite loyal to the president. And so it'll require a slight dance, but ultimately I really struggle to see anything other than Kevin Warsh sailing through.
Yeah, I think they've got to sort this out. They're bound to sort it out, I'd have thought. But the kind of side effect, I think, could be that the more reluctant Trump is to back off, and the more this carries on, the more likely that Jay Powell will exercise his right to remain on the Fed board, which goes back to our earlier conversation about how easy it is for Warsh to carry the board with him. So I think this will be resolved, but it could end up backfiring for Trump.